Hi friends! Okay, so today we're here and we're discussing Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz, and today is chapter 11, How to Unlock Your Real Personality. Okay, so personality, that magnetic and mysterious something that is easy to recognize but difficult to define, is not so much something that is acquired from without as something that is released from within. What we call personality is the outward evidence of that unique and individual creative self made in the image of God, that spark of divinity within us, or what might be called the free and full expression of your real self. Okay, so that's personality. Remember, we're looking for a certain type of personality that we want to become. This real self within every person is attractive. It is magnetic. It has a powerful impact and influence upon other people. We have the feeling that we are in touch with something real and basic, and it does something to us. And on the other hand, a phony is universally disliked and detested. So when people are not their real self, we can feel it, we know it, and nobody likes it universally. Okay. Every human being has a mysterious something we call personality. When we say that a person has a good personality, what we really mean is that he has freed and released the creative potential within him and is able to express his real self. Poor personality and inhibited personality are one and the same. So poor personality or inhibited personality. The person with a poor personality does not express the creative self within. He has restrained it, handcuffed it, locked it up, and thrown away the key. The word inhibit literally means to stop, to prevent, prohibit, restrain. The inhibited personality has imposed restraint upon the expression of real self. For one reason or another, he is afraid to express himself, afraid to be himself, and has locked up his real self within an inner prison. So that's what he's gonna get to it, but he basically says millions of people are running around with this, and there's an easy way. Well, it's gonna take practice. I shouldn't say easy, but there are steps to get rid of that. So symptoms of inhibition are many and varied: shyness, timidness, self-consciousness, hostility, feelings of excessive guilt, insomnia, nervousness, irritability, inability to get along with others, and frustration is often a characteristic. But the basic frustration is likely to color and overflow into other areas, and the basic frustration is his failure to be himself and his failure to adequately express himself. So all of those people, they get frustrated often, and it's because they're not expressing their true self inside. Okay, negative feedback is in the serval mechanism is equivalent to criticism. Negative feedback says, in effect, you are wrong, you are off course, and you need to take corrective action to get back on the beam. The purpose of negative feedback, however, is to modify response and change the course forward action, not to stop it altogether. So a lot of people, when they're too sensitive and they get that negative feedback or that they get that criticism and they take it, they're too sensitive to it, they completely stop. And that's what he's saying we do not want to do. We want to keep correcting course and get to that target. If negative feedback is working properly, a missile or torpedo reacts to criticism just enough to correct course and keep going forward to the target. And it'll be a little bit of a zigzag pattern that they're on. However, if the mechanism is too sensitive to negative feedback, the serval mechanism overcorrects. Instead of progressing forward to the target, it will perform exaggerated lateral zigzags or stop all forward progress altogether. So it's changing its course back and forth, but it's not going forward, and that's the key. Remember, we always have to be growing forward. Falling forward is something you'll also hear people saying. Our own built-in serval mechanisms work in the same way. We must have negative feedback in order to operate purposefully, in order to steer our way or be guided to a goal. So again, when you get negative feedback, criticism, whatever, don't be sensitive to it and let it shut you down. Just take it in and keep growing. Negative feedback always says, in effect, stop what you're doing or the way you're doing it and do something else. So its purpose is to modify your response and change the degree of forward action, but not to stop it. Now, here's the thing, where negative feedback is excessive or you're too sensitive to negative feedback, that is going to be a total inhibition of response. And that's where you're going to have problems, where there's negative feedback in excess. So we are likely to conclude, inhibition and excessive negative feedback are one and the same. When we overreact to negative feedback or criticism, we are likely to conclude that not only is our present course slightly off beam or wrong, but that it is wrong for us to even want to go forward. So that's usually when people quit on themselves because they take the feedback as, rather than correct it or make a change, just you shouldn't even be doing that. You're not worthy of it. You're not deserving of that. And he's going to get to that. So basically he's saying, when you're getting those feedbacks that says that you're off course or missing the mark, we conclude that self-expression is wrong, or that success for us is wrong. And don't take that when you get criticism or your negative feedback. Just keep going. Make sure you do not stop. Okay. And then he has a bunch of examples about stuttering, and we're not really going to talk about that, but basically when the summary is, he says, when excessive negative feedback or self-criticism was eliminated, so when they got rid of excessive negative feedback and self-criticism, this is about the stuttering, there's a couple of pages, inhibition disappeared and performance improved. Okay, so you get rid of excessive negative feedback and you get rid of self-criticism, and then you're going to see that inhibition disappears and that performance will improve. And so he's saying, so we're going to apply that to our personality. He also has an example about something called the purpose tremor. And basically when you're trying to put a thread into a needle, and then right to the point where you get to and then you start shaking your hand. It's called a purpose tremor. So basically you're on purpose and you're trying to get to it, and right when it's time to put it through the needle, the eye of the needle, you start shaking your hand like crazy. And then he has another example, when you're pouring hot water into a tiny little opening of a bottle. And then he also says that in certain pathological conditions, like an injury to the brain, the purpose tremor can become very pronounced. So if a person has a zigzag back and forth in their hands, like usually if they're just relaxed, it's not a big deal. But when they try to start doing something, then it starts zigzagging because they have a purpose to it. Now, if he's trying to like sign his name, it says if he's ashamed of this and it becomes even more careful not to make an error in the presence of strangers, he might not be able to sign his name at all. So it starts getting worse and worse. But he's basically going to start saying it's because we're worried about outside of what other people think of us, and that's not where our focus should be. So basically now he's saying use relaxation techniques because they are very effective for when you're in that kind of a situation. So excessive carefulness and anxiety are close in kin. So they're very similar. Both have to do with too much concern for possible failure, or doing the wrong thing, or making too much of a conscious effort to do the right thing. And again, you're too worried about what other people have to say. Then William James, he had some advice to students and teachers. And they were kind of saying, you have to be at that time, they were saying teachers need to like really be prepared for their students and the lessons. And that's not a bad thing. Planning is not a bad thing, but when it's crippling, that's when you're going to have a problem. So he says, prepare yourself in the subject so well that it should always be on tap, like ready to flow. Then in the course room, trust your spontaneity and fling away all further care. So don't get caught up in, should I do this and should I do this and how to do that? Like let it flow. And then he said, if you're a student, if you want really to do your best in an examination, fling away the book the day before, say to yourself, I won't waste another minute on this miserable thing. And then don't care one iota whether I succeed or not. Say it sincerely and feel it, and go out and play or go to sleep or go to bed. And I'm sure the results the next day will encourage you to use this method permanently. So that was a guy named William James. But basically, some people who like stress themselves so bad, they can't even perform when it comes to the day of the test. Okay, so self-consciousness is really other consciousness. So they're starting to get to the point where you are worried about what other people are thinking about you, and you should stop that. The cause and effect relationship between excessive negative feedback and what we call self-consciousness can be readily seen. So any social relationship, we constantly receive negative feedback data from other people. So smiles, frowns, subtle cues of approval and disapproval. And it's basically how we interact and keep knowing if the person is engaged with us. And persons with good personalities are so popular and magnetic in social situations, and they sense this communication from other people, and they automatically and spontaneously react and respond to it in a creative way. So they're not too worried about, ooh, what should I say? Should I say this? Should I not say this? Or how are they thinking about me now? They're comfortable with themselves, and they're just letting it flow. And that's the creativity inside of you, which is your personality coming out. That's what he's getting to. However, this type of negative feedback to be effective should be creative. That is, it should be more or less subconscious and automatic and spontaneous rather than consciously contrived or thought about. So again, don't get so bogged down in, ooh, should I say this? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Did I, don't overthink yourself. When you become too consciously concerned about what others think, when you become too careful to consciously try to please others, when you become too sensitive to the real or fancied, like basically imaginary disapproval of other people, then you have excessive negative feedback, inhibition, and poor performance. So basically you're worrying way too much about what other people think. Never wonder consciously what other person is thinking of you or how they are judging you. And then there's a famous salesman, author, lecturer. His name is James Mangan. And he wrote a book. It's called The Knack of Selling Yourself. And basically he says, he used to get really nervous when he went to fancy hotels for fancy lunches and when he was meeting with big wigs and stuff. And he realized, I didn't get fancy when I was eating with Ma and Pa at the kitchen table. So then he made this... it's basically a tool where you imagine yourself just eating with Ma and Pa at home, where you're not worrying about what they're thinking about you or how they're judging your eating and your manners. Because he said he had his etiquette. He just started getting nervous. And so he said, no, I've done this a million times. So talk yourself into something that's you've done a million times and you're really relaxed, and just say, I'm going home to eat supper with Ma and Pa. I've been through this 1,000 times. Nothing new can happen here. Attitude, just have that attitude of all new and strange situations. Like, just be confident and relaxed about it. This attitude of being immune to strangers or strange situations, which this total disregard for all unknown or unexpected, has a name. It is called poise. Poise is a deliberate shunning aside of all fears arising from new and uncontrollable circumstances. So don't put so much weight on it that you stop acting authentically, basically. Just trust yourself and let yourself react. Okay, so, and then another guy, Dr. Edward Wiggum, he realized it wasn't that he was too self-conscious, it's that he was really excessive other consciousness. And so he was too painfully sensitive to what others might think of everything he said or did or every move he made. So then he said, when I'm by myself, I'm fine. I'm totally relaxed. I have things to say. I'm interesting. So he said, no, I need to start. For him, he turned it around. He said, I need to be more self-conscious and just act of my own self, like when I am alone and comfortable. And he said, total disregard for the opinion and judgment of other people did not result in his becoming callous, arrogant, or entirely insensitive to others. So if you're too far that way where you're worried about everybody, trust me, when you let go of that, you still aren't going to go crazy the other way. He says there's no danger of entirely eradicating negative feedback, no matter how hard you try. So again, it's only for the people who are too worried about what other people think of them. They're not telling you to go out and start being like completely a sociopath. Consciousness itself is learned negative feedback mechanism having to do with morals and ethics. If it is learned and stored data, and if it's correct, so if what you're learning of right and wrong is correct, and if the feedback mechanism is not overly sensitive but realistic, the results are we don't have to think about every little thing, and our conscious is going to help be our guide and having the burden to decide constantly what to do and what's right and wrong if you were programmed right from the very beginning. So the consciousness will guard you and steer you insofar as ethics and morals are concerned. Your conscience works automatically and subconsciously, as does any other feedback system. But Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick said your conscious can fool you. So basically, if it was programmed wrong, if you got the wrong information, it depends on your basic beliefs concerning right and wrong. If your basic beliefs are true, realistic, and sensible, conscious can become valuable ally in dealing with the real world and sailing upon ethical sea. So because they're trying to tell you to stop overthinking everything and just let it flow. And if you have a good conscience and you know what's right and wrong, you're going to be fine. If you do have something that's wrong in your conscious, then you're going to have to start figuring out what it is. So if your basic beliefs themselves are wrong, untrue, unrealistic, or nonsensical, then these will declinate your compass and get you off the true north. So they're going to make your conscious not in your best advantage. Okay, so let your conscious be your guide. Our conscious must be based on truth, and it must point to true north. It has to have the correct right and wrong values and beliefs in it. Okay, self-expression, I can't say it, or lack of it is not basically an ethical question, aside from the fact that it is our duty to use the talents that our creator gave us. So when you're doing your self-expression, it's not a moral thing, but he's going to start showing where people think it's a moral thing, and it goes back to the ethics and what was programmed in your right and wrong, which sits in your conscious. So he says, so yet self-expression may become morally wrong as far as your conscience is concerned if you were squelched, shut up, shamed, humiliated, or perhaps punished as a child for speaking up, expressing your ideas, showing off. Such a child learns that it is wrong to express himself, to hold himself out as having any worthwhile ideas, or perhaps to speak at all. So kids who are scolded way too much, a lot of times they'll just completely shut down and think that they don't get to say anything. If a child is punished for showing anger or shamed too much for showing fear, or perhaps made fun of for showing love, he learns that expressing his real feelings is wrong. Some children learn that it is sinful or wrong only to express the bad emotions, anger and fear. But when you inhibit bad emotions, you also inhibit the expression of good emotions. And the yardstick for judging expressions is not goodness or badness. It's going to be, is it appropriate or inappropriate? So that reaction, if anger and fear are expressed at the appropriate time, then it's an appropriate emotion. You can't say, oh, that's a bad emotion, because what he's saying is you're going to inhibit also good emotions. When you start suppressing bad, quote unquote, bad emotions, you're going to start suppressing good emotions too. And that becomes a problem also in your relationships. Properly directed and controlled anger is an important element of courage. Every time a child comes up with an opinion, he is squelched and put in his place and learns that it is right for him to be nobody and is wrong for him to want to be somebody. So be careful when you tell little kids to shut up. Like, that's not a good thing. Okay, we can become overly sensitive and become too carefully concerned with what other people, with whether we have a right to succeed or in a worthwhile endeavor. So something you're doing that's even worthwhile, you still wonder, oh, do I have a right to do this? We become too carefully concerned about whether or not I deserve this. And then he talks about stage fright. He said it's a common and universal phenomenon, and it goes back to basically people thinking that they'll get punished for speaking up or expressing their opinion or presuming to be somebody that they're not, or showing off, or overly worried about people judging you and what they're going to think of you. So most of us, we learn certain things and we're punished as children. And he says that is part of why people are afraid of stage fright. And it illustrates how universal it is in this suppression and inhibition of self-expression. So people are afraid and they're not comfortable to express themselves in front of other people. Millions who suffer from unhappiness and failure because of inhibition, and you need to deliberately practice disinhibition, and you need to practice being less careful, less concerned, and less conscientious. And then those people will be like, well, we can't just have a crazy society where everybody's doing everything they want. And he says, yes, I say you are correct. The world does need a certain amount of inhibition, but not you. The key words are a certain amount. So he's talking about people who are overly so worried about what everyone thinks and never speak up and never want to participate in certain things because of that. And basically because they're not giving of their real self, their true self inside, which is the self that your creator gave you. So that's what he's getting back to. You have to share that part of you. Okay, so the cure lies in taking a long step in the opposite direction. And our goal is an adequate, self-fulfilling, creative personality, right? So remember, we're using all this negative feedback or criticism. We're using all of the input, but this is our end goal, is that we want to have an adequate, self-fulfilling, creative personality. And when he says adequate nowadays kind of seems like it means kind of so-so, or, it's good enough, but he doesn't actually mean it in that way. He means like good, like a strong, good self-esteem. Okay. So now here's, and we're getting to the practice exercise of this. So whether you need disinhibition or not. Okay, so feedback signals, which can tell you whether or not you're off course, if you need too much or if you have too little inhibition. Okay, this is kind of funny. If you continually get yourself into trouble because of overconfidence, if you habitually rush in where angels fear to tread, if you habitually find yourself in hot water because of impulsive, ill-considered actions, if projects backfire on you because you always practice acting first and asking questions later, if you can never admit you're wrong, if you are a loud talker and a blabbermouth, you probably have too little inhibition. So this is not for you. This practice exercise is not for you. You need to think more about your consequences before acting. You need to stop acting like a bull in a china shop and plan your activities more carefully. So this, if you fall into that category, this is not your homework. However, the great majority of people do not fall into the above category. If you are shy around strangers, if you dread new and strange situations, if you feel inadequate, worry a lot, or are anxious, overly concerned, if you are nervous and feel self-conscious, if you have any nervous symptoms such as facial tics, blinks of your eyes unnecessarily, tremor, difficulty going to sleep, if you feel ill at ease in social situations, if you hold yourself back and continually take a back seat, then these are all symptoms showing that you have too much inhibition, you are too careful in everything, and you plan too much. So practice exercises. Number 1, don't wonder in advance what you're going to say. Just open your mouth and say it. Improvise as you go along. Like, just start, let it flow, and just trust yourself, be the real you. Number 2, don't plan. Take no thought for tomorrow. Don't think before you act. Act and correct your actions as you go along. This advice may seem radical, but yet it is actually the way that all servo mechanisms must work. So remember, he's talking about the torpedo, and it just kind of keeps correcting its course as it goes. Okay, number 3, stop criticizing yourself. This one is huge. So even if you do fall into the bull in the china, everybody should really listen to this one. Stop criticizing yourself. It becomes that voice in your head that you hear all day that you pretend you don't hear, but it's there. Stop criticizing yourself. The inhibited person indulges in self-critical analysis continually. After each action, however after each action, however simple, he says to himself, I wonder if I should have done that. After he has gotten up the courage enough to say something, he immediately says to himself, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe the other person will take it the wrong way. Stop all this tearing yourself apart. Useful and beneficial feedback works subconsciously, spontaneously, and automatically. Remember, just let it flow. Let the real you be you. You're a good person. You're not going to be I was going to say a bad word. Conscious self-criticism, self-analysis, and introspection is good and useful if undertaken perhaps once a year. But as a continual, moment by moment, day by day, sort of second-guessing yourself or playing Monday morning quarterback to your past action is defeating. Watch for this self-criticism, pull yourself up short, and stop it. Okay, so when you hear that voice in your head, just stop it and replace it with something positive and just keep cheering yourself on, because you have to be your biggest cheerleader. Make a habit of speaking louder than usual. Inhibited people are notoriously soft-spoken. Raise the volume of your voice. You don't have to shout at people and use an angry tone. Just consciously practice speaking louder than usual. Loud talk in itself is a power disinhibitor. So that's going to help people get to more of their inner power, their inner who they are, their inner personality. And it also gives an example, like, you know, when you're lifting weights or something, you get 15% more strength when, and it allows you to exert all your strength when they make the loud shouting noises, when they're like lifting weights and stuff. Number 5, this is the last one. Let people know when you like them. So remember how he said it will, if you push down the bad emotions, it also pushes down the good emotions. And that's the dangerous part, because you want to be well balanced and you want to be connected to the people that you love. So this is number 5. This is the last one. He says, and actually this is, let people know when you like them. The inhibited personality is as afraid of expressing good feelings as bad ones. If he expresses love, he is afraid it will be judged sentimentally. If he expresses friendship, he is afraid it will be considered fawning or apple polishing. If he compliments someone, he is afraid the other will think of him superficially or suspect an ulterior motive. Totally ignore all these negative feedback signals. Compliment at least 3 people every day. If you like what someone is doing or wearing or saying, let them know it. Be direct. I like that, Joe. Mary, that's a very pretty hat. Jim, that proves to me that you are a swell person. We've got to start saying these things, seriously. You are a swell person. And if you are married, just say to your wife, I love you, at least 2 times a day. And quite honestly, say it to your husband too. Say it to the person you love, because tomorrow's not promised. All right, so that's it for today. Go do your homework. And if you're a bull in the china shop, be careful of that. And everyone, do something today that your future self will be thankful you did. Have a great day.